Hello, hello. If you've clicked on this video, I feel like I already know why you're here and I'm not gonna waste any time. Let's discuss why did I quit nursing? If you're new here, my name is Stephanie. I'm a nurse turned content creator and I live in Dallas, Texas. I vlog about all things to do in Dallas. So shameless plug, if you wanna know the best spots to go, follow me on Instagram and TikTok. It's at Stephanie Camille. And if you wanna know what life is like in Dallas or discussing all things nursing, content creation, subscribe to me here on YouTube. I would love to have you on this new journey. Let's get into it. Why did I quit nursing? Nursing is such a broad profession. There's so many reasons people get in it, so many reasons people leave. I'm gonna talk about my experience. In this video, we're gonna cover the good, the bad, the ugly, why I left, and a little bit about what I'm doing now. So quick backstory, I got my BSN in 2016 and I quit nursing toward the end of 2022. I also got my MBA in 2022. So that was like my last hurrah. I was like, I'm out of here. I'm changing careers. During the time when I was a nurse, I worked everywhere. I worked med-surg, tele, ortho, PCU, step down. I did a little bit of ICU when I was forced during COVID. We'll talk about that. What else did I do? I was a legal nurse consultant for a few months, and that was a really cool job. It just wasn't for me, but that was a really cool job. I was a travel nurse for 3.5 years. So I have had like a vast experiences as a nurse, which I feel like gives me, the credibility to speak on this because I have been at so many different hospitals. I've experienced so many different healthcare systems, and there are some things that are just all the same across the board and really unchanging that I really couldn't get with. So let's start with things I liked. Number one was the schedule. I graduated when I was 21, so working 3 days a week was ideal. Baby, I was flying all over the country, okay? When you work 3 days a week, you can kind of like stack your days. So I would do 3 days during the first half of the week. I would have 10 days off, and then I could do 3 days on the back half. So it was perfect because I could vacation, I could fly all over, do whatever I wanted to do. The schedule just gave me so much flexibility as a young person fresh out of college, There are also some hospitals where you can stack your days. So there were some times where I could work 6 days one week and then you wouldn't see me for 2 weeks, and I'll work my 6 days another week and then take 2 more weeks off. So the schedule was super flexible, and I really liked that when I first became a nurse. The second thing I really liked was caring for people. I love helping people. I'm a people person by nature, and there's just something very meaningful about helping somebody when they truly need it. I loved getting to know people. I loved hearing their stories. I gained so much wisdom just from listening to people and hearing their life story, and they would share so much advice and things with me. Like, that was definitely one of my favorite parts of the job, was just genuinely getting to know people and building those human connections. The last thing I really liked about nursing was the financial and job stability. You can't beat it. Like, you'll always have a job. When I first graduated, I was making $32 an hour, which is like $66,000 a year. And at 21, 22, I was living. I already told you, I was flying, I was buying everything I wanted to do. But most importantly, I loved that in nursing, you can work for however much money you're willing to. There's always good overtime incentives. So by the end of that year, I believe I made around $82,000, and it helped me pay down my debt significantly. Like, I don't come from a rich family. I had to finance myself through college. So I had a good amount of debt I needed to pay off after I was done. And I had bought a car my senior year. Bad move. But I had bought a car. So when I came out of school, I had around $45,000 worth of debt. And I was able to pay that off in 1.5 years. And so that's why I will always tell people, like, nursing is not a bad place to start. It's really not. It helped me get my financial footing in this world. And it also helped me just kind of get to a place where I felt comfortable taking time off in order to switch careers. So I do think that paying down my debt and being financially stable was pivotal in helping me switch careers. And we're going to talk about that in a later video. Now let's get into the things that I did not like about nursing. And we're going to go back to that first point of the schedule. I really loved the schedule when I first became a nurse. The flexibility was amazing. But as I got older and I was seeking more consistency, stability, routine, the schedule was so disruptive. It was so disruptive to my personal life. When you're a new grad or you're new to a hospital, like you've just changed jobs, number one, you get the worst schedule. And number two, when you're working those 3 12-hour shifts, you can have a schedule of Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday that you're working, and then the following week, it probably is Monday, Wednesday, Friday. It can be just so sporadic and inconsistent that it's hard to create a consistent workout routine. It's hard to eat consistently healthy meals. It's hard to schedule things with your friends and family, have consistent times with your group, your community. And so that became so disruptive to my personal life and my mental health. I was missing out on a lot of events. I was missing out on a lot of family parties, just important things in my friends' lives. And it started to weigh on my mental health. I also did not like working the weekends. And I know this is not specific to nursing, but after a while, I hated working the weekends because the thing about it is everybody else is on a 9 to 5 schedule. So they're off on the weekends, they're out having fun, family parties are happening, and no one else is off on like a random Tuesday or a Wednesday. So I found myself when I was off during the week, I would spend those days alone, and then I would be working when everyone else in my life is gathering. And I started to get very, very isolated. I also started to further get isolated with the holiday schedule. I'm originally from New Jersey. I currently live in Dallas, so I don't live where my family is. And for holidays as a nurse, let's use Christmas for an example. You either work Christmas or you work Christmas Eve and the day after. So for me, whatever days that I work, there wasn't enough time for me to fly back to New Jersey to see my family, so I ended up missing the complete holiday. And that was fine for the first couple years because you don't realize all that you're missing. But as I got older, missing Christmas consistently, missing Thanksgiving consistently, the 4th of July, Memorial Day, those seem like very small holidays. But when you're consistently excluded from those festivities and you see all your loved ones continually gathering, I'm telling you, it is very hard. Well, actually, let me speak for myself. It was very hard on me, and I started to dislike it. Next thing I did not like were the demands of the job. As a nurse, I knew that I would be responsible for people's lives, essentially, but I did not know all the hats that I would be required to wear. As a nurse, you are every single job in the hospital because at the end of the day, all the responsibility falls on you for some reason. I have no idea why, but you are always going to be to blame if something goes wrong, and you're never going to be rewarded if it goes good. So that is just how the profession works. And one thing I did not like is that I was expected to be dietary, respiratory, transport, the doctor, the secretary, x-ray. I was required to do so many jobs in addition to being a nurse and keeping these patients alive. And so having to juggle all of those hats after a while, I started to see not enough pay. I'm not going to say the pay is not great, is not good, but I will say it's not enough for all that you sacrifice. And so when I started to see all the demands and all the jobs that I had to wear, and I started to look at my paycheck and how worn down I was, how worn down my body was, it started not to be worth the trade-off anymore. I also felt like nursing was bleeding over into my personal life. Like there was so much rigidity around nursing. Like there is only one way to insert a Foley catheter. There's only one way to do an IV. And I completely understand those things. But that was bleeding over into my personal life where I was like, oh, there's only one way to do this. There's only one way to do that. And when things would go awry, it would give me anxiety. I would freak out. I just had a tough time separating. Things do not have to be so rigid in your personal life, but when you go to work, they need to follow the book, and if they don't, there will be consequences. So it was really hard to separate those two, and it was bleeding over. There was also, I have notes, so I don't want to forget anything. Oh, the stress of the job. That is another thing. Because you have to wear so many hats, the stress of the job started to get to me. I was suffering with high blood pressure. I was suffering with anxiety. I had PTSD from COVID, and we'll get into that. But these things from the job were starting to manifest themselves in my personal life, and negatively. I was gaining weight. I had acne. It was all bad. I'm telling you, I was down bad. And so I started to see the effects on my health. And again, when I look at the trade-off, it wasn't worth it anymore. This leads me right into the next thing I did not like about nursing, which were the systemic issues in the hospital. I could do a whole video on this, so I'm gonna keep my thing brief. But I will say things that I did not like were low staffing. There were not enough staff in a lot of these hospitals to care for the amount of patients and the acuity of these patients. A lot of the times in the hospital, I'm gonna give you an example. There may be a patient in the ICU, they're very, very sick, but there also may be a patient coming in who is like this much sicker than them, right? And so if there's only 12 beds in the ICU and there's 12 patients in there right now, someone has to get moved. So what they'll do is they'll find their most stable patient and move them out of the ICU, probably to a floor like mine. However, a floor like mine, may not have the nurses to take care of that critically sick patient, because in the ICU, typically you have 2 patients to 1 nurse. On the floors that I were working on, like the step down PCU, you would have maybe 1 nurse to 4 patients, 1 nurse to 5. I've seen 1 nurse to 6, 7, 8 on a PCU floor, and I've worked that and it's been miserable, but I have seen that. And so you have a patient, a critically sick patient coming to my floor where I have 5 other patients. I can't truly give the patient who is critically sick and needs to be watched every 20 minutes, I can't truly give them the care that they need because there are not enough nurses on this floor to care for that patient. This floor is also has too many patients per nurse. A lot of the times the ratios were so terrible on these floors. I've seen nurses in the ICU be tripled, have 3 patients. I've seen nurses on my floor, like I said, have 7, 8 patients. And these are still critically sick patients. They're just a step down from the ICU, but they're still very, very sick and one wrong move from going right back to the ICU, which typically is what happens. So a lot of the times the ratios were insane. And let's say I have 8 patients. No, I'll go with 7. I won't be in the most dramatic, even though the hospital I worked at, you know who you are, who would have me with 8 patients. But let's say I had 7 patients and I have to do rounds every hour on those patients. That's the expectation. I can't even spend 10 minutes with each patient per hour because I have 7 patients and I still need to chart, pull meds, talk to the doctors, organize transport, organize people who are going home, get them discharged. So realistically, I cannot even see every patient once an hour. And when you have patients who have had strokes, heart attacks, are waiting on transplants, you need to see them very often. You need to be able to give them the care that they need. You need to be able to walk them. You need to be able to help them. But outside of giving meds, there are so many other activities that are involved in nursing people back to health. And you don't have the resources or the time to do that in a lot of these hospital settings. And it starts to wear on you over time. For example, there may be a patient who has a heart arrhythmia that leads to a fatal arrhythmia. And an arrhythmia is an irregular heart rhythm. But sometimes there are precipitating events that you can see where you can stop that fatal heart rhythm. But if I have 6, 7, 8 patients, it's very easy to miss that precipitating heart rhythm that leads to that fatal heart rhythm. And so a lot of the times you're not able to watch these patients the way you want to. You're not able to monitor them or look into their health history to look for things that may present an issue later on. And so you know that there is better care that you can give these people, but you don't have the time and resources to do that. And that is a systemic issue in the hospital that needs to be addressed ASAP. This is why people are leaving the hospital in drones, because it leads to burnout. For so many times, I have missed a lunch break. I've been on my feet for all 13 hours. I haven't even been able to drink water because if I go on a lunch break, Mr. Brown, who needs a blood transfusion stat, and Miss Brown, who's next door, who has that arrhythmia, if I go take a 30-minute break off the floor and something happens to them, then I'm at fault. You get what I'm saying? I'm not even actually allowed to leave the hospital. So I have to sit in the break room and try to decompress my own stress, try to fill up my own cup so that I can care for these people. And it just becomes impossible. I transparently got tired of choosing between taking my lunch break or someone dying. That type of stress is absolutely ridiculous to put on one person. It is unfair and unrealistic. And I started to see that as my time as a nurse went on. I also hated how nurses were treated by all parties, by doctors, patients, other staff. It is like the nurse is meant to be this punching bag that absorbs everyone else's stress and is supposed to smile and rub your back with good faith and all is well, And it really became difficult when I would get cursed out by a doctor and then I have to go into the patient's room and tell their family why the doctor refuses to come in there and see them. You know what I'm saying? Even though it wasn't my fault. I had a very specific incident, and it's so hard for me not to even name these hospitals by names, but I'll be nice. But I had a very specific incident where I had a patient who was waiting on the floor for 2 days for a cardiothoracic consult, which means a cardiothoracic surgeon was supposed to come see the patient. I came on shift at 7 a.m. and she was like, hey, I'm waiting for, the CT doctor. I haven't seen him. I go check the chart. There's no consult. Mind you, this woman's been sitting here for 2 days, and people have been telling her that this doctor is coming by, this specialist is coming by to see her. And the whole time, no one's coming by to see her because there is no consults in. The doctor did not put in a note for the cardiothoracic surgeon to come see them. Okay, fine. So I go call the doctor. He doesn't answer, of course. I finally see him on the floor and I pull him to the side. I'm like, hey, I have a patient. She's waiting on a CT consult, but there's no CT consult in. Can you throw one in for her? And he screamed at me on the floor. Like, he screamed at me about something unrelated, number one. And he screamed at me because I didn't make the patient rounds, which is when you go into a room with all the doctors, like every discipline, and you present your patient, and then they basically talk about the plan of care for the day. However, this was a day where someone called out, and so I had 7 patients, and 3 of them were critically sick, and so I couldn't make rounds that day. Again, if I go to rounds and someone falls, I get blamed. If I don't go to rounds, I get blamed. Whatever. So the doctor was screaming at me about not coming to rounds so badly that people who overheard him actually reported him, and he ended up coming back to apologize and whatever. But if no one else had heard him, he would have never come back to apologize. That's one. And 2, the fact that he and other staff, there is even this acceptance of talking to others that way in this professional environment, and that is normal, ridiculous to me. No one should ever speak to another human being the way he spoke to me, especially in a professional setting. And that day, I clearly saw the abuse that nurses have to go through from doctors, patients, every discipline, even when it's not their fault and they're truly doing their best. And I just came to the conclusion that I do not want to work under these circumstances for 30 years. I just didn't want to do it. I'm really trying to keep this video short, and I will make another one elaborating on some of these topics. So drop a comment down below if you have questions or things you want me to elaborate on. But my last point in this of things I didn't like were the financial constraints of being in the hospital and the limited opportunities for growth. I have to elaborate on this because I know some people are like, well, as a nurse, you can do so many different jobs and you can make so much money. And that sounds really good in theory. And I feel like that is a theory that people in the hospital want to keep circulating so that people keep wanting to be nurses. But the truth of the matter is, I told you guys when I was 21, I was making $66,000. I had applied to a staff job maybe 3 years ago. Is it 2024 now? So 3 years ago, I had applied to a staff nursing job. At that point, I had 5 years of nursing experience. I was really super qualified for the job because it was in a heart clinic and I had direct heart experience. I ended up getting the job and the starting salary was $66,000. And I told the guy, I'm like, hey, I really can't work for $66,000 with 5 years of experience. I think I asked for maybe $85,000 initially. And he was like, the most that he could do was $71,000. And again, I'm not saying this is not good money. I'm just saying for our skill set and what we do as nurses, it is not enough. And so he told me the max he could do was $71,000. I ended up turning the job down because I was just like, hey, that's not going to work for me, and just move on. He calls me back 24 hours later and he's like, hey, I can meet you at $80,000. And I was just like, so yesterday the max you could do was 71. I turned the job down, moved on with my life, and now you can do 80. And I felt like that was ridiculous. Number one, I should not have to negotiate that hard for my worth. And $80,000 still ain't my worth. I'm gonna be transparent with y'all. As a nurse, we should be making 6 figures. And I do think if this were a white male dominated profession, actually, if this were just a male dominated profession, we would make a lot more money. Again, I'll keep my ting brief on that one. But $80,000 is still not my worth, but that is what I was willing to accept. But it took me turning down the job and walking away from it for you to come back and actually offer me close to what I'm asking. And that, to me, was ridiculous because you would have let me accept $66,000 had I said yes, knowing that my skill set is worth way more than $66,000. And I'm not just saying oh, my worth based on how I feel. No, I read financial documents and I can tell you how much as a nurse I generate for this hospital. There is a direct correlation between me as a nurse and profitability. And so I should be paid my worth in this instance. And so he ended up coming back with $80,000. I ended up turning it down and ended up doing travel nursing for a little bit more time and leaving the profession. I felt like that was a sign from God of there's something greater out here for you. So go with your gut and turn it down. And I promise I will return this back to you tenfold. And he did, period. Okay. But I felt like that was a time where it was like, yo, we sacrifice so much. We work holidays and weekends and have people's lives in the palm of our hands. And we cannot even get paid what we're worth. Nah, that was the nail in the coffin for nursing for me. That was a nail in the coffin. I also feel like the opportunities for growth are kind of limited. You can go back to school and become an APN and NP. However, for the money invested for loans and so forth, I don't know if I personally feel like the payoff is worth the extra $10,000, $20,000 a year. I think there are easier ways to make $10,000, $20,000 more a year. I don't necessarily know if you need to go in debt to do that. I also feel like becoming a nurse practitioner and an APN kind of exposes you a little bit more to being taken advantage of just on the doctor side. You know what I'm saying? Because you're working directly for a doctor. And so you still have this kind of harsh boss over your head. You're still working these super long hours and you still have a glass ceiling on how much you can truly make. You know what I'm saying? You can only make, like my situation, what they're willing to give. And so I just did not like the fact that I was always going to be limited as far as how much I can make. I was also always going to be tethered to a hospital or a healthcare setting. This is when remote work was booming. This is after COVID. And it really opened my eyes and exposed me to the fact that there are other ways to make good money. There are, in hindsight, I realized that the marketing girlies were making more than I was as a nurse. So I was exposed to that there were other ways to make money. There were other ways to lift that glass ceiling and be able to earn as much money as you want to make. And so I realized that kind of you're still limited on what you can do. You're still limited on what people say you can earn. The only advanced degree that I think would be worth it is a CRNA, because I believe you make upwards of like close to 200,000, if not more. And I feel like that is worth the trade-off. However, CRNA school, number one, requires you to be in the ICU for a year or two beforehand. And the ICU, we'll talk about this in another video, but the ICU and specialty units can be very gate-kept. It can be very hard, especially for people of color, to get into these settings. I had a direct experience with that, but for the purpose of time, I won't go into it. But it's very hard for people of color to get into these settings, to even get the opportunity to go to CRNA school to advance your career. And so if you want to fight the uphill battle of doing that, you absolutely can, and it is absolutely doable. I never want to discourage anyone from doing it because I think under the right circumstances, it's 100% worth it. But I will say it is very hard to get into the position to go to CRNA school. And then when you go to CRNA school, you can't work. So you really already got to stockpile your money so that you have money and so forth, resources to do the job. And once you get out, I do feel like that's worth it. But I felt like other than that, the opportunities for true financial growth were very limited. And I wanted to be able to make as much money as I worked for. I wanted to eat what I kill, essentially. And so I feel like that is what I can do with social media that I couldn't do with nursing. So for all of these reasons, I decided to leave the profession completely alone in 2022. And it has been lovely, to be honest. I can't lie. It's been amazing. I transitioned from nursing. I told you I got my MBA, and I ended up getting a job at a beauty company doing their social media. So I got my foot in the door as far as the marketing world. And then from there, I ended up getting what I call my dream job at a marketing agency. And so really started working corporate marketing. I started working with different hotels and restaurant chains. And it was just so amazing to get that experience. And then a year ago, I went full-time content creator because during that time I was growing my own social media platforms. And so a year ago, I went full-time content creator. It has been a year of me being self-employed. And I can say I didn't love my experience as a nurse, but I think it led me here. And I am so thankful for those years that I did spend as a nurse, and I did work really hard, and I met amazing people. And so this video is not to discourage anyone from being a nurse, but it is to show you my true experience, what the truth is behind nursing, because I wish I would have watched this type of video before I went into the profession. I wish I would have just had a little bit more knowledge about what it was like before I made that decision at 18 to become a nurse. But I will say that decision at 18 was not in vain. And if you are a nurse watching this and you're looking to switch careers or you're thinking about it, I encourage you to look into your other options, to look into your other passions, because there are so many ways to make money in this world. And if you're not happy doing it as a nurse, you can be happy doing something else. And that is just the honest truth. And there are so many professions out here. Please, like, open your mind and your heart to receive something different. And if you are someone who's thinking about going into nursing and you're watching this video, again, I encourage you to take my experience and pair it with the rest of the research that you do and make your own decision of what you want to do. You know, make your own decision of what profession or which way you want to go. But I hope this video was helpful for someone, and I hope you enjoyed watching it. And if you want to see more videos like this, please like, subscribe, comment. It really helps the algorithm. So please like and comment if you've watched this all the way through. And I will look at the comments. I'll see about other videos, and I will see you guys the next time. Bye-bye.